The overseer, angrily holding a plate of double-skin milk pudding, loudly questioned the chefs, demanding to know who had made the pudding. When no one admitted to it, the overseer called in chef after chef, pulling out hairs from the pudding and comparing them to the chef's hair. The overseer's meticulous attention to the ingredients was because this was a Michelin 3-star prison. Every day, the chefs prepared a lavish spread of food on the 0 floor. The food was then sent down through the platform to the prisoners on lower floors, where it was gradually devoured. By the time the food reached the first floor, the carefully plated dishes were trampled beyond recognition. The platform would stop at each floor for a few minutes to allow prisoners to eat before descending to the next level. By the time the food reached several dozen floors down, it was mostly leftovers. But to survive, the prisoners swallowed it without complaint. When the platform reached over 100 floors, there was no food left at all. In this place, prisoners faced only 2 outcomes: either they ate their fellow inmates or became food for them. Each floor has 2 prisoners, and the floors are 6 meters apart, making it impossible for people on upper floors to reach the lower floors or for those on lower floors to climb up to the upper ones. No one knows exactly how many floors this prison has. All that can be seen, whether looking up or down, is an endless array of floors and the pitch-black abyss. The prisoners here fall into only 2 categories. 99% are either death row inmates or the mentally ill, while only 1% are those who voluntarily exchanged a brief experience for substantial rewards. Goreng is one of the 1% gamblers. Fortunately, he was lucky enough to start on the 48th floor, and his cellmate is a beardless old man. The old man skillfully placed a pillow on the floor, then knelt and sat down, reminiscent of a ritualistic scene. The next moment, the floor lit up with a green light, and a platform full of food slowly descended to their level. The old man immediately began to eat voraciously. Seeing the leftovers from the meals, Goreng felt a churn in his stomach and advised the old man not to eat the disgusting food. However, the old man didn't respond and continued to eat greedily. Seeing this, Goreng decided to take an apple and put it in his pocket, planning to use it for a treat when he felt better. Then the entire platform descended. The old man drank the last of his wine and threw the bottle down to the next floor, then spat in dissatisfaction. Goreng was momentarily stunned. After the old man ate and drank his fill, he lay down on the bed, perhaps to help the food digest more slowly. At that moment, Goreng felt the floor suddenly become hot, and the temperature kept rising. The old man calmly reminded him that the problem was due to leaving something that shouldn't have been left behind. Goreng then remembered the apple in his pocket. After throwing it down the platform, the temperature on the floor returned to normal. It turned out that food was only meant for them while the platform was on their floor. If anything was left behind, the temperature would drastically change, either burning them to ashes or freezing them into ice sculptures. When the platform brought food the next day, it was still just a table of leftovers, which Goreng resisted with all his might. Watching the old man once again devour the food greedily, followed by his signature spitting gesture, Goreng saw that the old man even gave a full of 38-degree urine to the prisoners on the lower floors, ignoring their shouts. Every prisoner entering the prison could bring 1 item with them. Most would choose weapons, but there were also prisoners who brought peculiar items, even money. The old man had chosen a knife, while Goreng carried only a book with him. For these few days, he had been subsisting on the nourishment of knowledge. However, after 3 days, he couldn't resist any longer. Tentatively, he approached the platform and picked up a pickled bean, putting it in his mouth. Feeling the satisfaction of food, Goreng also began to indulge, eating ravenously just like the old man. Thus, Goreng gradually adapted to life on the 48th floor. Sometimes, when he encountered food he liked, he would even overeat. However, on this particular day, a disheveled woman descended with the platform. She was very resistant to Goreng's overtures. The old man advised him to leave her alone because this woman, Miharu, came down once a month, reportedly searching for her child. Soon, the food platform descended with a woman to the next floor. The 2 of them exchanged no words as they looked at each other from a distance. But the next moment, the woman was dragged away by 2 men from the lower floor. Goreng, anxious, shouted loudly from above, but he lacked the courage to jump down the 6 meters to help, even as he heard the woman's anguished screams. The next moment, the woman, covered in blood, crawled back onto the platform. Clearly, Goreng's earlier concerns were entirely misplaced. At this point, he realized that none of the prisoners in this prison were kind-hearted. Goreng gradually adapted to this rule-less yet rule-bound prison, and soon became assimilated into the harsh reality, becoming one of the food scavengers. He no longer hesitated in his greed. When he encountered food he liked, he would even eat until he vomited. Thus, Goreng calmly spent a month in this manner. One night, the platform whistled through the floors, bringing with it a pungent odor. They soon fell into unconsciousness. When Goreng awoke the next day, he found himself tightly bound on the bed. The old man approached him slowly and quietly reassured him. It was then that Goreng realized they were on the 171st floor, which meant they wouldn't even have scraps to eat. Sure enough, when the platform descended to their floor, it was filled with pots and pans, but not a single morsel of food. The old man did not want to kill Goreng, but in order to survive, he planned to eat Goreng's flesh bit by bit, trying to avoid killing him in the process. Before that, however, the old man intended to let Goreng go hungry for a few days, much like the preparation of French escargot, allowing the snail to cleanse itself of impurities before being used as food. After a few days, just when the meat would be at its most tender, the old man couldn't stand it anymore. Goreng had also purged most of his bodily waste. The old man slowly crouched in front of the bed, then violently sliced into Goreng's thigh with the knife. But just at that moment, Miharu happened to arrive at their floor on the platform. She smashed a wine bottle over the old man's head, then picked up the knife and slashed the old man's throat. She immediately untied Goreng and handed him the sword. Without any hesitation, Goreng fell off the bed and crawled step by step towards the old man. He then repeatedly stabbed him with the sword. When Goreng woke up again, the wound on his thigh had been roughly bandaged, and Miharu was beside him, shamelessly gnawing on the old man's flesh. Seeing Goreng awake, she hurried to his side, cutting a small piece of fresh meat and handing it to him. Goreng carefully took it and brought it to his mouth, but the pungent taste was unbearable. Miharu thoughtfully brought a bit of water to his mouth, which somewhat diluted the taste. Then, Miharu tore off another piece of raw meat, chewed it thoroughly, and brought it to Goreng's mouth again. Perhaps because the raw taste had been filtered by her saliva, Goreng was finally able to swallow it. However, before Goreng could thank her, Miharu followed the platform down to the next level, continuing her search for her child. After struggling for a few days, Goreng finally couldn't escape the judgment of human nature and extended his hand towards the old man's corpse. Even though the body was decaying, Goreng had no other choice, but this is the fate of those on the lower levels of the prison, either become the hunter or be the prey. The physical weakness and mental torment soon left Goreng in a state of delirium, experiencing hallucinations, but he was quickly awakened by a dog licking him. It turned out that the prison had assigned him a new cellmate. Goreng immediately looked at the wall and saw the number 33, which made him breathe a sigh of relief. He then turned his attention to his new cellmate. To his surprise, he realized that this person was the very inspector who had evaluated him when he first entered the prison, the one responsible for assessing and approving new inmates. The inspector, who had sent countless prisoners into this place, had grown weary of the order imposed by the administrators and now wanted to experience the life of the managed. Just then, the food platform descended to their level. Fortunately, the leftovers from the upper levels were still relatively plentiful. The weakened Goreng immediately started devouring the food. In contrast, the inspector prepared 2 empty plates, filling them with equal portions of food. It turned out that he was preparing fixed portions for the prisoners below, hoping that after they ate, they would also prepare the same portions for those further down. The inspector hoped that by doing this, she could ensure that everyone on the lower levels would at least get the basic amount of food. However, her idealistic thinking was completely lost on the brutal prisoners. No one cared about the survival of those below them as she did. Despite this, the inspector didn't give up. Every day, she prepared the same portions and advised the people on the lower levels to pass on the hope. One day, Goreng finally had enough. He loudly threatened the people below that if they didn't follow the inspector's instructions, he would set off the poop on the food platform. Sure enough, his hardline approach intimidated the lower-level prisoners, and they reluctantly complied. But this only worked for that one level, as Goreng could only aim his threats downward and had no way to influence those even further below. That day, Miharu once again descended to their level on the food platform, but this time she was severely injured. Goreng and the inspector quickly carried her to the bed and tended to her wounds carefully. However, that night, Goreng was woken up by the sound of shouting. The 2 women were fighting, and it turned out that Miharu, driven by extreme hunger, had eaten the inspector's beloved dog. To prevent things from escalating, Goreng decided to send Miharu away the next day. But without her dog, the inspector lost all will to live. She confided in Goreng that it was he who had sent Miharu to the prison in the first place. She also revealed that she wasn't searching for her child at all, she was a complete lunatic. The inspector removed her shirt, revealing a prominent scar on her chest. It turned out that she was terminally ill and didn't want to spend her final days in pain, so she came to the prison with her dog to end her life. However, after arriving, she realized that even as a former overseer, she only knew the tip of the iceberg when it came to this prison. Despite everything, her method of rationing food was effective. Soon, it was time for the platform to descend again. When Goreng finally woke up, the first thing he saw was the inspector's feet, followed by the stark number 202 on the wall. He leaned over to look down, and all he could see was an endless abyss, confirming that the prison was much larger than just 200 levels. Around him were prisoners on the brink of collapse. Goreng gently lowered the inspector's corpse and lay on top of it, feeling nearly broken himself. For several days, the platform arrived empty. In his weakened state, Goreng picked up a shard and painstakingly carved dates into the wall. The days of hunger were torturous, and in his desperation, he resorted to tearing apart his beloved book to stave off his hunger. After holding out for a few more days, Goreng's rationality finally overpowered his humanity. He grabbed the knife and slowly approached the inspector's corpse. Meanwhile, another prisoner, a black man, was attempting to escape. He was climbing desperately, using a thick rope to pull himself up, driven by the hope of escaping this cannibalistic prison. As he reached up, he extended his large hand, hoping that someone above would help pull him out. But people from above didn't help him, instead they mock him and he was about to fall. But was saved by Goreng. If it weren't for a fellow inmate pulling him up, the black man would have been shattered to pieces by now. Roaring in frustration, he turned on the faucet, washing away the filth from his body. Losing the rope dashed his hopes of escaping, and this time, he found himself on the 6th level of the prison, closer to the exit than he'd ever been. It turns out this prison has hundreds of levels, and the inmates are randomly rotated to different floors. The food is always distributed from the 0 level, passed down gradually through the lower floors. Those at the top feast on luxurious meals that others could only dream of, while those below are left with scraps, even the saliva of those above. Naturally, the limited food supply runs out by the time it reaches the floors below 100, leaving the people at the very bottom to either starve or turn to cannibalism to survive. Although Goreng was fortunate to land on the 6th floor this time, after witnessing the deaths of several cellmates, he had grown indifferent to everything. However, inspired by the inspector's influence, Goreng decided to challenge the prison's food distribution system. After precise calculations, he realized that if the prisoners rationed their meals, everyone could get enough food to survive. He then persuaded the black man, a devout believer, to join his cause. Together, they overturned their beds, dismantled the steel pipes, and prepared to descend to the lower levels with the food platform the next day. Under the protection of the burly black man, no one dared to approach their platform. For the first 50 floors, they didn't distribute any food to the prisoners, knowing that these individuals could survive a day without eating. It was only when they reached the 51st floor that they began rationing the food. On the advice of a wise prisoner, they decided to keep one dish intact and send it back to the administrators to signal their intention to break the system's rules. As they descended, the two continued to enforce order on the food platform, resorting to force when necessary to deal with those who refused to cooperate. However, it wasn't long before they encountered violence. Goreng predicted that this would be the floor where Miharu would wake up. To their shock, they discovered that when a floor had no living inmates, the food platform would skip it entirely. On the next level, they found Miharu being pinned down and brutally stabbed by a large man. Goreng immediately leaped down to fight the brute, while the black man engaged in a struggle with another prisoner wielding a long knife. But in their first clash, the black man suffered a deep wound to his side. Meanwhile, Goreng was overpowered, pinned to the ground with the brute's hands tightening around his throat. Just as Goreng was on the brink of suffocation, a head rolled to the side, and the hot spray of blood splashed across his face like watermelon juice. Goreng endured the excruciating pain as he crawled towards the bed, but the woman had already passed away. The black man, using the last of his strength, pulled Goreng onto the descending platform. Mustering all his remaining energy, they continued to distribute food, floor by floor. The platform, however, did not stop until it reached the 250th floor, far beyond what they had anticipated. Despite this, they refused to give up. Along the way, they witnessed the true horrors of this hellish place. Prisoners crushed in half by the platform, others turned to ashes for hiding food, and some clinging to piles of worthless cash, lost in dreams. By this point, they had no food left to distribute, except for the custard they intended to send as a message. But there were no longer any living souls in need of food. Just as they were about to collapse from exhaustion, the platform finally came to a stop. It seemed they had reached the bottom of the prison, with the number 333 carved ominously into the wall, a true vision of hell. At that moment, Goreng noticed a child lying under the bed, wide-eyed and staring at them. Despite their pain, Goreng and the black man crawled off the platform to investigate. But the platform did not wait, it plunged into the endless abyss. The child emerged from under the bed, eyes fixed intently on the custard in the black man's hand. The black man kept muttering under his breath, clutching the long knife in his hand, and slowly pointed it toward the child. But in the next moment, the child eagerly devoured the custard, which was supposed to be their message. Though their plan had failed, both of them felt a sense of joy. At least this time, the food distribution had been perfect, and their kindness had not been completely erased by the horrors of the prison. When Goreng woke up again, he found the black man lying unconscious in a pool of blood, a result he hadn't anticipated. Despite being alone now, Goreng refused to give up. Though the custard was gone, the girl had become the most important message they could deliver. As the platform descended to the very bottom once more, Goreng took the girl's hand and stepped onto the platform, preparing to venture into the abyss below.